Hi everyone, my name is Nathan from jazzguitarlessons.net, and we're back with you on masterclass number 5, I believe.
Number five, yes.
And joining me here today, usually Mark's the one to do this, but joining me here today is
Mark from jazzguitarlessons.net, of course.
your hero and hero of the hour. And today I actually wanted to talk about a particular method. And the reason why I'm actually starting this off is because it's this method that I've developed for working on improv, specifically in terms of the phrase itself. And I call it the anatomy of a phrase method. So it's an idea where we dissect a phrase down to its component parts and talk about specific things that we use in each component, specific examples of lines and such. But doing this helps us to understand how people phrase in jazz in general, and specifically jazz. We're not talking about rock phrases, we're not talking about anything else, just jazz.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to go through a bunch of ideas with this model, this one-bar phrase model, actually. We'll talk about that in a sec. But I'm going to run Mark through his paces on it, and he has... Sorry, say again.
So the point is this, is like Nathan, I've seen the docs and I read through them and I've played through them, but I'm seeing this masterclass as Nathan teaching me the approach as if I was a fresh student trying to attempting to learn jazz phrasing, jazz phrases, and etc. I just want to take a moment to introduce, so we don't need to introduce ourselves. We do this at the top of every masterclass so far. But one thing I want to mention is please check out the other masterclasses that we have. We have 4, that's number 5, and recall the first few ones we had music as a language, very interesting perspective. Nathan and I chat for an hour on this topic. It was a very good one. We talked about musical mindset, the mental game of playing music. And we've also talked about rhythms and metronome. And also the last one, number 4, was on ways to practice better. Practice makes perfect type of thing. So this is Masterclass 5. And I'll let Nathan take it away, and I'll just be the pupil and play the examples and ask the questions.
Welcome to Jazz Guitar Lessons, where we help guitarists learn jazz faster, express themselves more fluently, and have fun along the way. My name is Mark, and if you're looking to learn jazz, form better practice habits, and especially if you enjoy a French accent, make sure to subscribe.
So the entire point of this phrase, one-bar phrase model, as I said, is to understand how jazz musicians on records and in performances are playing things, to hear those phrases as phrases, complete sentences, let's say in English, and also to apply that to your own playing and make your phrasing more, I guess, self-consistent and less rambly, let's say, and more just like, here is my point, moving on to the next point, very concise, So let's talk about the actual one-bar phrase that I wanted to talk about that I mentioned earlier itself. So I'm just going to scroll down in my notes here.
Mm-hmm.
The idea here is that we are going to take each piece of a phrase and we're gonna apply all this into a phrase that is 1 bar in length, approximately 1 bar. It's actually you're gonna see that the bar is bigger than the phrase is bigger than 1 bar. It's gonna extend a little bit before the bar and a little bit after the bar. I think that works left and right.
It's a 1 bar phrase that's longer than 1 bar. So
exactly.
Okay, good.
Not quite 1 bar. So the idea with this is we're going to learn 4 different components. Mm-hmm. And there's a process for this that involves learning a piece of vocabulary for each of those 4 components, which helps you develop a muscle memory framework. You want to just drill those things down and then just have it in your arms, in your fingers. And then you want to put those pieces of vocabulary together into a single phrase, played in 1 bar plus.
1 bar plus, pick up and trail.
Exactly. And we'll talk more about those components in a sec.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to attempt variations on those pieces of vocabulary, and then we're going to look at how you can expand that 1 bar phrase into 2 bar phrases, and by repeating certain components over and over again to make it, longer phrases. And eventually the idea is to take different pieces of vocabulary and use them as substitutes for those components. So every piece of vocabulary sort of considers where you are in the bar. what beat you're on or what offbeat you're on, and where you're going to, what beat you're trying to land on. It's about targeting. So those are some Improv 101 and 102 ideas, the second pillar of improvisation ideas, if you wanted to draw some parallels. Very important stuff.
Targeting thirds, stuff like that, 7 to 3rd resolutions.
Exactly.
So, as a sideline, this is amazing because it's the word anatomy is a word that really dissecting, like piece by piece. And it's as opposed to a neighbor's old book that tells you this is a chord symbol and this is a scale that goes on top of it. And it's like, yeah, but what am I playing? So now Nathan's method is actually building vocabulary from the get-go.
Yeah, and I really think also that sort of sandboxing method, where it's just like, here's the area in which you can play, which is an idea in Improv 101, defining the sandbox. That idea is really important, I think, too. But it's nice to have both the sort of play this directly, and also the just play, have fun, try to do whatever you can with the sand that you build a sandcastle or build a sand mermaid. I don't know. You know what I mean, right?
Mermaid. Okay.
So once again, actually, I've taught this to a couple of students already, and they've mentioned that the way I've taught this has been a very like Mr. Miyagi-esque approach, Karate Kid, wax on, wax off.
I watched Cobra Kai recently as well.
Yeah, good series.
It's fun. Yeah, I don't want to go into like film critic type of thing, but it's cool.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So I think at this point it's a good idea to go into each component and talk about it. So the first one I want to talk about is the intro.
Yeah.
And I'm going to draw a lot of parallels, just like in our music as a language lecture or masterclass.
The first one, actually, yeah.
Yeah. The idea is that we're drawing parallels to the way that you might start a sentence too. So the intro would be like using a word such as however to transition into your next point, into your next phrase, or furthermore, something like that, right? The idea with the intro is that you're going to introduce a phrase by leading toward a strong note on beat 1, second pillar of improv stuff.
Okay. Cool.
So I'm going to pull up a file that is going to be an intro that actually, for those of you who have taken Mark's, what's it called? 25 exercises to better jazz phrasing course?
The pickup lines, right? You go into, I just want to give some context. So say I play the D note. We're doing a 2-5-1 C major. So C major. So we start with a 2, and the D note is played with your pinky, and you lead into the tonic, the root note of the D Dorian scale. That's what you meant, Nathan, right?
That's correct. And these are forward motion approach that actually, Mark, you got this from somebody else, or this idea, or?
Of course, yeah. It's a great book. I should find it on my bookshelf. Hal Galper, piano player, ex-Alzenal, bebopper. The book is called Forward Motion. It's to be taken with a grain of salt, but it's basically say, well, you should hear where your target is. You should hear it and play something before it, so that you sound like you're picking up instead of classical. Start your scale on beat 1, like very rigid type of thing.
Exactly. So
Sorry, go on.
These forward motion approaches you're about to hear, you hear them. You can actually find them on learn.jazzguitarlessons.net, your concierge program, in 25 exercises to better jazz phrasing, as well as, I think, improv and chromaticism.
Yes. Maybe in Improv 103 as well, we start to hint at that.
I think so as well. We also use some other pieces of vocabulary that are very useful for this sort of intro and targeting vocabulary. But we're going to start with the forward motion approaches first. Okay. So if we take a look here, I'm just going to share my screen.
Yeah. You want me to? I'll be the guinea pig. I want to play those.
Sounds good. So you'll see here that we're actually going to take. We're going to do this 4-bar cycle, a very common 4-bar cycle where we see a 2, 5, and a 1, and then the 6th chord, which is A7, which is used as a secondary dominant to lead back to the 2 chord again. Hopefully you can see my cursor on the screen.
Yes, I see it. So perfect. I can play along, and you can point your cursor if you want. If you're
awesome.
Ready.
So this is a chord cycle, and in the first time we do the cycle, we're just going to target the root of each chord. So Mark.
Sorry, go ahead.
Mark, if you could play the if you could play the root of D minor 7 first. This is our target. Good stuff. We're gonna lead into this. So, Mark, if you could count yourself off and lead into it with a forward motion approach.
Yeah. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1.
Awesome. And do the same with the root to G7.
And 4, and 1.
And then C major 7.
And 4, and 1.
And then A7.
And 4, and 1.
So these are all fragments of a phrase. None of them are a full phrase in and of themselves, but they're fragments of just the beginnings of phrases. And we're going to do this as a drill. It's a sort of antiseptic environment where we can just target a specific piece of vocabulary, and then later on we're going to pair that with other pieces of vocabulary, and finally we're going to put it all together. So it's kind of like passing drills in soccer. You go to a soccer practice. You don't play the entire game right away. You start off with a drill first, right?
Okay, perfect. So would you like me to put a backing track on and you can just point the cursor? I play through this and...
Yeah, please. That'd be great.
Okay.
And I will scroll down as it continues onward.
Perfect. Here we go.
Roots first.
1, 2, 3.
Next section. Next section.
Oh yeah. Oh, sorry, ending on a 6. I didn't back it properly.
Whoops, that's okay. So the idea here is that you drill these forward motion approaches so that you get really used to targeting specific scale degrees of the scale that we're in. We're in the key of C major here. These are 2, 5, 1, and 6 chords in the key of C major, and we're targeting different notes in each chord every single time. The forward motion approach, by the way, you can learn more about what it is exactly and how it works by well, you can sort of read this blurb, but also you can check out those courses I mentioned, 25 exercises for better jazz phrasing and improv and chromaticism. So the use of this really leads strongly into the phrase. We land on a strong chord tone, in this case the root, in the next section the third, or maybe if you wanted to target the fifth, or if you wanted to start off by targeting the seventh. Any of those are all options that you get to practice on this exercise sheet, for example. And in so doing, you get a really strong start. You're like, this is the chord, we have landed on the chord, we know exactly what we're going for here. And now on to the next fragment, the next component, and I like to call it the development. The idea here is we're going to actually develop the sound of the chord a little bit more.
Instead of, once again, doing the Ebersol approach of like, oh, D minor 7's D Dorian, and then now we've started at least with a pickup. It makes sense. We know where we're going. We know the different important notes. Out of the 7, we targeted 4 per chord, so that's already 16 notes to retain, and then so we developed from that.
Exactly. I think the importance of this is that while that sort of Ebersol sandboxing approach is giving you a bunch of raw materials, here's notes. You can put them together any way you want. Here, we're going to give you some actual vocabulary. And for the development, the idea is, what better way to develop a chord than to just play the chord tones? So an arpeggio, very, very simple.
Super simple.
Now, on top of that, I actually want to mention that the importance of this comes from not only just playing those notes. The importance of this approach doesn't come just from playing the notes, but also from actually playing the rhythms correctly. So in this case, I wanted to actually give a very common and very important swing rhythm, which is the triplet. Most of our rhythms are based off of the triplet in some way or another. So swing eighths, sort of based off a triplet, loosely based off a triplet. So with that in mind, we have this now ascending arpeggio piece of vocabulary used as the development. And I'll share my screen once again, and we have this here.
Part 2, yes. Perfect.
So I'm actually going to sorry, just expand this a little bit more. Hopefully you can see that a little bit better.
Yeah.
And there we are. So this is going to develop the sound of the chord, as you can see in italics here. And the whole idea is from that target note that we landed upon, that root target that we landed on, or the third target in the next section, fifths or sevenths in the following sections, we can play the arpeggios from there. So Mark, could you play me a D minor 7 arpeggio? Awesome. So that's Mark's playing that in eighth notes. Can you play it in a triplet by counting yourself off?
3, 4.
Awesome. 1 triplet, 2. You want to get that last note landing on beat 2.
Yeah.
So we started off the bar on the root. We end up on the 7th of the chord.
1, 3, 5, 7. Yes.
Yeah. 1, 3, 5, 7. We're going to get somewhere else after that. If we did the same thing with the starting on the 3rd of a D minor 7, we would play
3,
Mark's
5, 7, 1.
There we go. Mark's, and this is something that everybody I think should do. Mark is doing a thing where he's singing and naming the notes that he's playing, especially the first few times that you play it.
Yeah. 3, 5, 7, 1. Triple 3, 5, flat 7, 1.
Mark is talking about Mark is calling out the rhythms. He's calling out the notes. He's getting intimate with the vocabulary itself, and that way you know exactly from every angle what you're playing and how you're playing it. You can look at other arpeggios here, but I think it's actually pretty self-explanatory. We want to play the chord tones, and we're going to ascend through the chord tones.
So the same chord tones we landed on beat note, now we start on. We start on with the triplet, and then that's like, it's going to be the extension of the...
Exactly. Yeah, we're moving on from there. And being able to cycle through an ascending arpeggio pattern starting from any chord tone in that arpeggio is a really important skill.
That's a lot of... If you do that well, you've covered a lot of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just so fundamental, but it's still more than, once again, just learning the C major scale. So modes. It's like you really know where you're starting from.
Exactly. Yeah. I also think this harkens back to something we talked about in improv and chromaticism, which is that fundamental maneuvers notion, where this is something that you have to know. It's foundational. Sorry, say again, Mark?
It's like a move. Yeah, I remember we shot that together, and we went, yeah, what's a move? Like you need like a skating move in hockey or a passing move in basketball. It's like that's what we talked about. So how about that? I just play maybe the first 4 bars so people hear the triplet.
Sounds good. I'll do the same thing. I'll share my screen, and I don't have to scroll this time. So the first 4 bars, we're targeting the root. We're hearing the triplet.
1, 2, 3, 4. Ending on 6 again. Sorry about that.
It just does that.
Sound of the rhythm, right?
Yep. So that gives you that's actually Mark wants to emphasize that again. I think it's really important that triplet rhythm. Just get it down. If you play this in eighth notes, this will change what's going to come next, because what comes next is how do we get from the last note of the arpeggio to the transition of the next beat, the next target, which would probably be beat 1 of the next bar, which would be a new chord. So how do we get from the last note to the first strong target note of the next chord, starting on beat 1 of the next bar? And
we save some time. We save some time in a way by using the triplet. It's like we compress time. We play 3 notes in the span of 1 beat. That's
exactly. Yeah. Instead of 2 notes in the span of 1 beat, and then 2 more notes after that. And that gives us more space to make this sort of transitional phase, which I like to call the change. I went through a bunch of names. I think I called it the conclusion. I'm like, that doesn't work because there is something that comes after. It's called the tail. We'll talk about that in a sec.
So you mean you were in the zone of it's a 1 bar phrase of more than 1 bar. Let's call it something else.
Exactly. And I want to expand on that in a sec, because it's super important for jazz, not necessarily for other genres, but for jazz. This past the beat 1 mark, this tail that I want to talk about, really important to jazz. It's kind of characteristic of it. But the idea with this next section, I called it the conclusion at first. Then I thought like maybe transition, and like not call it the change, because chord changes. Duh. What a jazz thing to say. Now,
the change, or is it called the development? No, I'm in the wrong file.
It is. So I've actually, you'll see, I think it's called conclusion on yours, number 4.
Oh, number 4. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. And now, at this point, actually, just real quick to sort of tie those first parts together, I am going to just show the PDF that I have that shows the interceding moment, right? So here we put the forward motion approach and the arpeggio together.
Yes.
And this is the last time that with the same backing track, you'll be able to play multiple components together, because at this point, you're starting to actually create a phrase that's too big to fit. You'll start overlapping components, right?
Got it.
So here let's just play that first section together. We're going to put that forward motion approach targeting the root of each chord, followed by a triplet arpeggio ascending.
Okay. So out of time, I'm reaching for my D root, and then from D I'm ascending a D minor 7 arpeggio.
Perfect.
Then I'm doing the same for the G, and then that's C major 7. That's passing note approaches from a bebop scale, so we don't have to talk about that now, but that's essentially the same one we had in the first file. And then for the A, okay, I'm good to go. Backing track?
Let's hear it.
Okay, here we go. One more. 1, 2, 3.
Awesome.
It ends on A. It's bugging me.
Yeah, he really wanted to result in the D minor, right? Repeat the cycle. Mm-hmm. So this is actually a really great demonstration of these strong harmonic and rhythmic starts to a phrase. And something I want to stress, and I think Mark wants to stress often enough, is that harmonic doesn't just mean, hey, it's the right chord tones. It's the right chord tones at the right time.
Yeah.
And that's really important. You got to get that target note, either it's a root or a third or a fifth or a seventh. You got to get it on beat 1. You have to align rhythmically with all these notes.
Yeah. And then, of course, that's like start of pillar 2. I would say it's like pillar 1.5. It's almost like pillar 2, and then in pillar 2, we're going to see not only how to be in the correct chord tone at the correct time, but also how to connect when the chord is changing, how to connect that thing, which is what I think you brought up in the next PDF, right?
Yes,
or
exactly.
Maybe I'm jumping too far.
I think that's where we're going next after this. By the way, for those of you who aren't familiar with the pillars of improvisation, there is a blog post where Mark explains this, the 3 pillars of improvisation, and they loosely correlate with each of the courses in Improv 101, 102, and 103 on learn.jazzguitarlessons.net.
Until we discover a 4th pillar.
Fourth pillar, the secret sauce. It's all, what's it again?
The mojo, the Pat Metheny mojo.
Yeah. Non-stop 30-second notes. It's the hair.
You gotta have it.
I heard someone say that if you look at all modern jazz guitarists, all of them are bald. All of the modern famous jazz guitarists are all bald.
Except
Pat Metheny. I think he worked at Magic Spell, and that's how he's sucking out the hair and talent from everyone else.
That's probably the best conspiracy theory I've heard in my whole life. Pat Metheny conspiracy.
Exactly. I love it.
So up next, so to recap, okay, you can connect with a forward motion. You land on root, third, fifth, seventh. Of course, there are great chord tones, and you have this ascending triplet thing. So we're learning vocabulary in the rhythmic sense of jazz as well, and put those two together. It sounds like what I just played.
Exactly.
And then where are we going?
Well, now we got to get that change that I was talking about earlier, which is let's transition to the next chord, the next bar. Well, we assume it's the next bar. It's usually how it works. 1 chord per bar in a lot of jazz. Sometimes there's 2 chords per bar, but these are all things that you can deal with in this phrase that we won't talk about for now. We're just going to work with this idea of like, hey, 2 in the 1 bar, the 5 chord in the next bar, the 1 chord in the next bar, the 6 chord in the next bar is after that. Whatever, easy stuff, right?
Long change, right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Basic stuff. So I'm going to go like this. You can see this again. So right now we're talking about we're going to combine the ascending arpeggio because it's an awkward place to stop. The end of it is an awkward place to pick up from. But we want to tie these two things in together. Play this piece of vocabulary, the ascending arpeggio, followed by how do we get to some strong chord tone on the next bar, kind of like we did with the first one.
Right.
The one that I've suggested for all of this is you should try to path from the last note that you played to the third of the next chord, because that makes for a very strong conclusion, very strong transition. So Mark, can you just play this first line, please?
Yes. 3, 4. We do this again. I hesitate a moment. 3, 4.
Mark ended on B natural, which is the third of G7, on beat 1 of that bar.
Right.
And this is actually the first part where we start saying, hey, now you got to make a little bit of decision making on your own. There are multiple ways to path to the third of the next chord. So for the way I teach this to my students, this is where we give a little bit of improvisation room, where we have to say, hey, you have to figure out this path on your own. Oftentimes, this involves experimentation and just by yourself being like, can I go da? Okay, I am on beat 1. You do this sort of freeze time or pause time counting. You're counting what beat you're on, so you're keeping track of time as it passes, but you can pause and slow down so it doesn't come all at once, you know? And so that's why in this sheet you see multiple examples of how to path to the third. Do you want to try these other 2 examples, number 2 and 3?
2 is reading. You're making me read, man.
Sorry.
4. I like that. Again. I like that because there's some part of the D minor pentatonic in there. So
Yeah.
planning the same.
It's a similar path. It's a very similar path. It gets you to the same place, but there's a slightly different flavor to it. Probably a bluesy flavor in this one, right?
Yeah, the skip is somewhere else. That's awesome. And then third one is more classical. Let's say almost.
You'll notice that you come back down the arpeggio at least, fifth, third. Sorry, 7th, 5th, 3rd, and then you walk down. They all get you to the same place. There are multiple ways to answer this question, but it's up to you to discover those paths and figure out how each of them, what flavor each of them has, how each of them feel. And that's, I think, a really big part of understanding how to get from point A to point B in jazz. That's a big thing. But also it's a big part of figuring out I want to say the mathematics of it, the arithmetic of it. I got 3 notes left, but I'm 4 notes away. So maybe I need to skip once and then walk some more.
Yes, and then you let your musical instinct kick in and say maybe you're going to play some notes that are out or out of place, but then you land, and maybe you land late, but then it's like, no, it was a delay, it was on purpose. Or maybe you land early, and then it's like, oh no, I'm on the end of 4, it's anticipated. So there's so much wiggle room to still be accurate in your change running.
Every single one of those options is valid musically, and they all have a different effect, and I want to impress that upon a lot of my students. But it's really hard for a lot of students. It depends on where you're at, what level you're at. Some of you might already have a really good handle on the geography of the fretboard or on the geography of music, of musical notes. And so this might come a little bit more naturally to you. But others of you might be exploring this geography, cutting through these pathways in the woods for the first time. And so this is where the experimentation comes in. You have to figure it out more or less for yourself at that point. I also mentioned maybe you want to target a different B, like a higher B natural note.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I also mentioned that you have to also figure out how to do this, not just with the root targets for the first chord, but you also have to do this for the arpeggio starting on the third, and the arpeggio starting on the fifth and on the seventh, and then pathing to the third of the next chord every single time.
Targeting the thirds, and then as get good, target fifth and other ones. Yeah. Wow.
So
That's
notice
it's a puzzle.
Yeah.
Like assemble this puzzle. Let's hear the
exactly. I like to tell my students that, like, hey, spend some time puzzle solving. It can be a lot of fun. It takes a little bit of that sort of cerebral aspect of, like, hey, I'm trying to solve a puzzle. It's not necessarily musical, but once you do the puzzle solving a little bit, you start developing that feeling for the sound. It's like, oh yeah, I actually know how the music sounds. And then you can put the puzzle solving aside because you've already solved it, and you can just play these lines and play this kind of music. And later on, what this is all going to come down to is not necessarily that you're going to play all of these lines every single time, but at the very least, it forms a good framework for you to but you maybe don't complete the phrase the way you usually do, or go for a different target, or switch out a piece of vocabulary. I'm using words that are all I'm using terms that are all like very cut and dry, I guess.
But then as you have all of this, you can express its creativity. It's like, what do you want to say? How do you want to say it? How long do you want to play? Short line, big lines, more inflections, go higher, go lower, but you know what you see, it's a road, you have your lines in the road, and you're still following the same road. You have labels.
Exactly. I find that it's very hard to express yourself creatively if you're already lost on the fretboard. You're like, I don't know what to play next. I don't even know where to start. So these are good starting points, all of them.
Story of my life. What am I doing here?
Yeah.
What is this place?
It's that Radiohead song. What the hell am I doing here?
Did we even book a gig here? Like,
wait, no one's kicking us out. So you know what? I think we're fine.
Yeah, that's a jazz musician's fallacy. It's like, if nobody kicks you out, it means you have a gig.
I love it.
With a girlfriend. If the girl does not kick you out, maybe you have a girlfriend.
Maybe you guys are dating. Maybe. Oh no. Yeah. The trick with the gig thing is getting paid. How do you do that?
I never. No. That would be another masterclass.
Oh.
I've never solved it for myself. So
exactly.
Even when you agree that you will get paid, then sometimes you don't.
You get paid less than you agreed on. Oh,
it's
not like you can send
tough gig. Yeah.
It's not like you can send the jazz police after them. After all.
Not anymore. No,
Not anymore.
Jazz police retired in 1968. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Miles Davis should have saved some for us. So now, with all of that done, you could pretty much leave it there. You could probably like figure out the rest for yourself, But there is one last component that extends this phrase past that first beat of the next bar landing point. Mm-hmm. So it extends it past the 1 bar mark. It's called the tail. I like to call it the tail. And it's particular, and I think it's really important to jazz phrasing. It's characteristic of jazz phrasing. Most of the time, if you listen to any jazz musician, they usually don't have a strong ending to their phrases. If you do have a strong ending to your phrase, it usually signals to the rest of the band that, like, we're done here. I'm moving on to the next solo. Or even oftentimes it doesn't. You listen to this great example of who is it? Oh, it's Miles Davis's and then John Coltrane's solos on Milestones.
Oh, yeah.
And Miles Davis plays da ba da ba da ba, and I think that's 1 bar into what should have been the start of John Coltrane's solo, and then John plays ba-la-la-la-da. He plays off of that idea. So you don't really want any sort of finality. You don't want that sort of period at the end of the sentence, QED, quaderat demonstratum. You don't want to say, like, we've proved this, we're done. No one else gets to say. We want something for the next soloist to say.
Right?
And also, you want something for you to, if you're not done your own solo, you want something for your own.
That's the comment I wanted to make. So this one, as a private instructor, private teaching jazz guitar privately, one of the biggest things I work on with people that are, I would say, intermediate improvisers is sometimes you don't know, well, like, when did that phrase start and when did it end? You know, it's like you need to start your phrase with a capital letter and end with a period. Like, it has to be clear. So sometimes people sound like they're rambling, but they're playing all the right pieces of vocabulary. They're playing the right scales over the right chords, mostly connecting, doing the chord tones thing that we've described, playing triplets, etc. Then you're like, well, we need to hear that there's a sense of conclusion. You go, oh. Then you start to, breathe. Take your second phrase. As guitarists, we never breathe.
We never have to.
Unless we go like this.
I wish I could. I just want to take a screenshot of that.
JazzGuitarLessons.net. Improve your jazz guitar playing with a real teacher.
Oh my gosh, that'd be so great for marketing.
Christmas card from Mark.
Exactly. We should do that for April Fool's sometime. Oh, I shouldn't have said it. Now they'll be expecting it.
Hey everyone, just a quick break here. If you're loving this episode and you want to elevate your own jazz guitar skills, reach out to us. We've guided thousands of guitarists in becoming accomplished jazzers beyond their wildest dreams. So check the link in the description or visit jazzguitarlessons.net to get started today. Okay, now back to the episode.
Where does this bring us? This brings us to the tail of the phrase. So the idea is, don't land on a strong beat and stop there. That rhythmically, that feels like a period at the end of the sentence. The rhythmic cadence of your speech has ended there. Also, don't end on a strong note, because that also feels like this is the chord. We are done. You want a little bit more of a tail at the end of it. And so the piece of vocabulary that I've given for this in this model is what I like to call the T for two phrase. Ba, 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 da. Yeah. And this is great because if you listen to the jazz standard T for two, you will actually hear a minor version and a major version. Targeting a major chord and targeting a minor chord, you can get this sort of two different shapes. Exactly. Another reference, I guess, that or another quote comes from Alone Together.
Oh, right.
And the idea behind this tail is to have usually the third of the chord followed by the root and then the ninth. So third, root, ninth, for that me singing D minor 7. Exactly. And then, Mark, if you want to demonstrate, let's say, the G7, so fundamentally a major sounding chord, it's got a major third. Exactly. Rhythmically, the entire phrase stops after the and of, or I guess the last note you land on is on the and of two.
Foot in the air, I would say, usually, yeah.
Gives you a little bit more momentum, a little bit more drive. You're like, this has got to come down eventually. I got to start playing something else after that. Take a deep breath, play a new phrase after. So do you want to play this? I love that so much. It's hilarious.
With a backing track, perhaps?
So that's our full phrase for targeting.
Yeah. You want to hear it with the track?
Yeah, let's hear it with the backing track. I'm going to point out that on this exercise sheet there are 4 pages worth of this, and the reason for that is because we're targeting we're going to start by targeting each of the chord tones of D minor 7. So the root, the third, the fifth, the seventh. That's the first part, the intro, right? With the forward motion approach. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to arpeggiate from there, and then we're going to path to the third. That's our change, and then we're going to T for 2 tail after that.
For the D, for the G, and for the C. So that's, and for the A too. Oh wow!
And for the A as well. So there's a lot here. So there's 4 repetitions of D minor 7, 1 for each chord tone start, 1 for each chord tone starting point. There's 4 for G7, same idea. 4 for C major 7.
So you're displacing. So the same phrase is displaced, but it's targeting different tones, but the components, ultimately the skeleton of it is exactly the same. It's a concept that we've talked about in the past half hour, right?
Exactly. The structure is fundamentally the same, but we're looking at different chords and different starting points within those chords. But we're ending up at the same place in each chord. The conclusion, like I said, was path to the third of the next chord, no matter what notes you started on. So you find all these different pathways from different starting points to get to the same ending point. You know, you start from here, you try to get here. Start from here, you try to get here. Start from here, you try to get there, you know. And that makes it relatively intuitive, I'd say. It's just a lot of work, you know.
A lot of stuff, man. Wow.
Yeah. You got to put in the wax on, wax off time.
That's exactly. I wish I had that when I first started to learn this stuff. Instead of like dabbling, just like in and out, try this, try stab in the dark. Like, I don't know. So, want to hear the first line maybe?
I'd love to, yeah.
The backing track? Here we go. 1, 2, 3. That's what I got. No 6th chord on this one, just 2, 5, and 1.
Exactly. Just for the sake of messing around with it, let's just jump to a different one. Let's hear a line on the targeting the third of the 6th chord, A7.
Okay. I don't have a backing track ready, but I can play the line. So
sure.
Can you do this without hesitating this time?
Go for it.
1, 2, 3.
Alone together.
Yeah. So yeah. It would be nice to hear. It's like you would need what I played now. You would need to hear the backing track going like 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3. I think I played the line wrong, but to hear it in the context of how many bars are past and how many bars are forward, it really helps your ears put in context too.
Definitely, and actually doing it like Mark did.
Yeah, you just kind of just strike. When you have empty space, just be mindful of striking the chords that are there, or else if you just read the tabs and just play the notes, you're not really learning anything. It's notes plus context, of course, plus rhythm, plus nice phrasing, plus understanding what you're doing, plus getting single, eating cup of soup every day, and just practicing jazz lines. That's how you do it. We're giving you the recipes. That's what you need to do.
Yep, exactly. Really, the idea behind all this is, if you were wondering how jazz phrases worked, this is it. This is basically how it works. At least one prototype of it, and you can switch out any of these components for appropriate pieces of vocabulary. So instead of a forward motion approach, maybe you use an enclosure, or maybe you just use a 3-note scale approach. Do, re, mi, fa.
Yeah.
Right? You could do just about anything that leads you that fulfills the purpose of each of those component phrases. And a really great important thing to do about this, and I kind of want to just get away from the model now and talk about, because I'm not teaching a course directly on how to do this. I want to talk about what you can do to leverage this model, right? Not yet. Yeah. And I think the really important thing to start with is take these ideas and keep them in your mind, and then go listen to Pat Martino. Or go listen to Pat Metheny, or any of the Pats. Wes Montgomery, you know?
John Patitucci, is that
John
Patitucci?
The conspiracy.
Bass player. The darn good bass player. Wow.
I'd say that just about any jazz player will play phrases that more or less follows this idea. And it might not be 1 bar long. Actually, I should mention, if you wanted to make it 2 bars long, I would just suggest repeating the development and change portions. So arpeggio, well, using the vocabulary that we used so far, arpeggio plus path to third, arpeggio plus path to third, arpeggio plus path ad nauseum. Right?
And then you also get your arpeggio, your triplet thing might start to be a descending arpeggio, or you might have it on beat 1 and beat 3, the two strong beats. That's a really easy way to go about extending it.
Yep, exactly. What Mark just mentioned is actually part of the training program that I put students through, which is, okay, now that we have the whole phrase, try doing a variation on the arpeggio. So instead of an ascending arpeggio, try a descending arpeggio. 1, 7, 5, 3.
Even if it's the same arpeggio, it's going to mess with your mind.
Yeah, the shape changes, the order is weird, and suddenly that makes you even more intimate with this piece of vocabulary, this arpeggio, the chord itself, right?
And the guitar. And
the guitar.
And,
yeah, the rhythm, And then there's other ones too. We like to talk about octave displacement. We talked about it in, I think, Improv 103.
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorite things ever. Like, it's so difficult too. It's like when sax players run out of notes, they just run out and like, oh, let me take this an octave up and just keep doing my phrase.
Exactly.
Guitars, it's like, oh, but it sounds so good. It's like Chet Baker meets.
I was teaching this to one of our students, Steve. Stephen was like, okay, so I've gotten this part down, but I want to do this. I'm going to try to do this octave displacement thing this week. And I'm like, sure, go for it. Now it's time to start on it. You have the sheets for it. Try it out. And he came back to me the next week and he's like, this is the secret sauce for what sounds like jazz.
Yeah, and for guys at home, don't try this at home. Still, you know. What would be a good example? I'll take my favorite one. It's not even anatomy of a phrase. Let's go down from the third of D minor 7. So F, E, D, C, B. So we're on the third of G now. So if you wanted to keep playing the C major scale, you could go. So this is how I always start to teach octave displacement. After you hit the third of G, keep playing the line down, but just jump the rest of the line up an octave. So you go. And then play a flat line instead. You know?
That's such an iconic line.
And then you're like, oh, Chet Baker. You know, or whatever. If you can think of something that you know you can conceptualize of, such as a descending scale, you know what it. But then you say, once I reach that note, I'm just good. So essentially, you jump up a seventh if you are within a scale. That's what you do to keep descending the line, but doing it an octave. Sorry, I stole your thunder there.
No, that's good.
I was telling myself I wasn't going to do it today.
No, that's a great explanation of it, though. And I mean, to be real, you can do this also in the other direction. Generally speaking, you want to displace by an octave in the opposite direction your line is headed. So if your line is going down, then you bring it back up an octave. Or if your line is going up, you want to bring it back down an octave before you continue onward. And that's how you want to conceptualize it every single time. So you can do this with arpeggios too, and you know this ends up being a thing like this, where you're playing. Oh, I had my pick right here already. So if you play an ascending arpeggio, you'll want to displace downward. D, F, A, C, root third, fifth, seventh, right? Well, if I just play the target note and then displace the rest of it by an octave downward, that's a very common line, right? Right? I added the change and then the tail back in afterwards. But that's one way to do it. You can also go the opposite direction. If you have a descending arpeggio, root, 7th, 5th, 3rd, you can go root, 7th, 5th, 3rd, but up an octave.
Same notes. This is amazing.
Exactly. Same notes, just in a different register suddenly. So, yeah, if you were to just look at letter names only, you would find no difference between those two lines,
Exactly. Okay.
but the register's changed.
Awesome. So we've covered, the start of targeting something. We've covered arpeggio up. Covered put this all together. We've covered, okay, now it's over 2 bars. I've covered some octave displacement stuff. Let's wrap this up. So you had started to talk how to leverage this, and then why would you want to? I know we've taken a bunch of notes, so let's go through the rest of the stuff, because I guess some of our watchers now are eager to download the files and start trying to do this on Cell by Starlight and on Blues maybe. So what are our concluding recommendations?
Well, the first thing that I wanted to talk about was that I want to talk about who's going to benefit from this, actually. Students who are already familiar with a few pieces of vocabulary will do great with this, because you can just plug in the vocabulary that you know directly into each component of the phrase, each dissected part of the phrase, and just practice it like that with the knowledge that you're trying to put it together into a singular cohesive phrase. I also want to start complete beginners off with this method by teaching them. When I teach them personally, I do this because I can hold their hand through learning each piece of vocabulary without it becoming a complicated issue or a big philosophical question, right?
Or
it's just
the previous knowledge blocking the way. No, my previous teacher told me to do this, or yeah.
It's like just here to keep it simple. Wax on, wax off. Do it so that your body knows how to do it. And then when the music plays, you just, it's just happening. So that's, I think, the most important thing for who's going to benefit from using this sort of method. But if you're not learning the method directly, if you're going to take one thing away from this masterclass, I want it to be that analytical side of the model, or pseudo-analytical. I don't want it to be too cerebral. I want it to be this sort of understanding of, here is how a phrase generally works. Now you're equipped with the tools to listen to jazz and be like, oh, there's the start of it, there's how they develop the sound, and then they finish it off and tail so that they can give themselves, it begs the question for another phrase. Keep that in mind when you're listening to any sort of jazz, and you'll be able to, you'll hear it better, I think. Mm-hmm. You'll hear jazz better.
Hear it, feel it. You hear something, you almost feel in your fingers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're like, I could almost play that. Yeah. He's going up, he's going down. I can feel the contour of the phrase. Listen to them with this model in mind. And I think this is actually a pretty universal feeling of, if you've ever come to a new genre that you've never heard before or you're not familiar with, or it challenges you in some way, you often need a mental framework or develop a mental framework in order to understand it better and meet it on its own terms. And so my idea here is this is telling you that this is sort of the general way we approach phrasing. It doesn't always work for other genres, but jazz specifically it works for.
Doesn't, it's almost like jazz exclusive, like anything that evolved from bebop is where it's coming from. Agreed.
Do you have any thoughts on who could benefit from it, or why we want to approach it this way?
Absolutely. I have thoughts over this whole approach, not just who might benefit. Look, sure. Anyone that wants to learn jazz phrasing, and it's funny, Nathan says, it will work for a lick. So to me, I once had this argument with a friend over jazz, saying, jazz is like one lick. Like even Coltrane had 2 or 3 licks. It's like, no, he had more than that. He knew like hundreds of licks. And I'm like, no, he didn't. It's like that. It's always repeating the same stuff. If you listen to Coltrane for long enough, you realize he's always playing the same things, tweaking it, starting on a different scale degree, adding a triplet, right? But even pick another player, pick Bill Evans, because I saw you listed Bill, you listed Wes Montgomery, Nathan on our notes, Miles Davis. Like players have their own cliche lines, and they all obey that certain. It's their own way of speaking the language. But Nathan's approach, which it's the first time I really get accustomed to it. I'm like, oh, this is what it is. This is how to apply it, how it works. Okay, I've seen this countless of times from great jazz educators such as ourselves. Thank you, Nathan. And point being, Hallgalper was one that we mentioned. There's the Bert Ligon thing. There's David Baker who's telling you, well, learn Parker heads, right? There's Barry Harris that has another approach, but essentially everyone's saying the same thing. It is, well, get accustomed to the vocabulary. That's one way to dissect it. So the dissection of it is the key. So the notes and the modes and the scales and the fingerings, whatever, less so. But the dissecting, if you approach it in this fashion, make this approach your own, or even come up with a new approach that you'll call something else. It reminds me, just that's my final thought, is someone say you need to get in shape. So people will swear by Pilates, right? And some people like Pilates is cool, but I'm into yoga. People like, I like to lift weights. And people's like, I can't lift weights. I hurt my ankle and my wrist. But I do gymnastics. I do my own push-ups and whatever. So regardless, these guys are all getting fit because they're all move their bodies in ways that work for them. So I think musically, it's the exact same story. It's like, it's just, did you want chili sauce or did you want Italian basil tomato sauce? But you're still eating the same meal. It's just that spice is different. So I think this is a great way to dissect. It also, I think Nathan's approach is superior to other approaches in the way that it's showing you how to dissect and maybe come up with your own way of dissecting things. Because, you could go way further than what you've written right now with that approach.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm glad because that is the way I wanted people to see it. I want it to be like this component fulfills a function, and this is the function. Fill that with anything you want. Put anything you want in there. I'm going to give you this because it sucks when a teacher sort of just like says like, well, you can I need you to do this. Screw off for a week and I'll see you next week. And you're like, how? When you're just starting out, it's really scary, right?
It's almost as if you've given a level of abstraction. You've generalized the approach so that, of course, you listed these, land on the third. Of course, it's the strongest place to start. You start with the gold, but then you could extrapolate and go, what? I want to land on the sharp 9, instead of this. And listen, Michael Brecker, like, yep. That's what he does. And he probably worked on landing on the flat 9 a whole bunch. But for sure, he knew how to land on the third first, right?
That's very important, I think. The notion that this is it is not it. This is the beginning. This is a good framework to start from, and you'll build more and more pieces onto that framework from which you can hang your improvising. And some of that ends up being, and actually the model leaves room for these sorts of alterations and more outside playing and things like that. At one point, one of the variations I end up doing for the arpeggio is, replace the root of the arpeggio with the 9th. And you get your upper structure, 3, 5, 7, 9. Forget the root, the bassist is playing it. And that sounds a certain way. It sounds very jazz-like. And then it says, hey, for dominant chords, instead of playing the natural 9, why not play the flat 9, like Mark mentioned earlier with that octave displacement stuff. Combine the 9th, the upper structure extension with octave displacement on a descending arpeggio. It's just like it can just stack on top of itself, all these variations, right? It's
so stackable. And for me, you started to talk about flat 9s, whatever. To me, if I were to take this approach and race it, say for myself, put me on a desert island and say, Mark, that's what you got to do. I would start using pentatonics in my pickups because I so love using superimposed pentatonics. This is my sound. So then it's like,
totally your thing.
Let's just, So very exciting. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. By the way, I love that analogy with I always love sports analogies, not for the competition side of it, but for the practice and focus training aspect of it. Like, what are we focusing on? How do we develop our skills? Super applicable for anything you do in jazz and music in general. And also, I love the sauces analogy. Both types of sauces, a chili sauce versus an Italian seasoning sauce, they fulfill the same function. They add moisture to the meal. They add a lot of seasoning and flavor to the meal, but in very different ways. And that's up to you. How do you want to sauce your pasta? Same idea.
Christmas card with that one.
Exactly.
Jazz guitar lessons. With the guitar. Okay, one more time. Okay.
Do you have anything else to say on this?
I did not get a good night of sleep if it didn't. Yeah. For people watching that know the website a little bit, I recently became a dad 12 days ago, so it's hard. It's one of those days. Today is a harder sleep day.
I also didn't sleep well, but not because of a baby.
Nathan is making babies. That's what's happening. Careless whisper.
Okay, so silliness out of the way.
It's completely off the rails.
Well, do we want to wrap this up? What's our final thoughts aside from that?
Very good approach. Do it by all means. At least try it. Make it your own. Nathan has a proven track record with private students of implementing this at different levels as well. It's worth checking it out. And if not that, only to see what dissecting is about and how you can dissect your own stuff. That's my conclusion, personally.
Thank you. I'd say, yeah, this doesn't have to be the only method you ever use, and it shouldn't be, I think. But that approach, those aspects of the approach, I think, are the most valuable for anyone. And so take this with a grain of salt, but try it out for yourself. Listen to jazz music and say, can I determine these components? I think it's there. I think it's there. And you might, email me, Nathan@jazzguitarlessons.net, and you might find that maybe there's this other component. Have you considered this? And I'd love to hear that. I'd love to discuss that more with you. So email me or at Nathan@jazzguitarlessons.net. Email Mark.
MARC at jazzguitarlessons.net.
There we are. Find us on the JGL members forum on the Facebook group, the exclusive Facebook group.
Inner Circle. We have these webinars that we run every other week, or Q&As. If you want to bring your questions to the webinars, even better. It adds values for others. For other students, an email is private, but if you bring this to a group call, it's like, hey, at this, you can raise your hand, we'll let you talk, or you can play parts, and we can really interact. That's really fun.
I love that part. I love that aspect of our student community. It's so tight knit. It's so cooperative. I love it. Brings everyone up. It's amazing. So yeah, definitely do that. Join in the Inner Circle's comment on JGL members forum. Until next time, happy shedding, and thank you, Mark, for joining me.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Awesome.
Take care, everybody.
Take care. Bye.